Not every sad story is a sob story. Some sad stories lead to happy endings. Sometimes grief can be good grief. Please welcome our next speaker. Title of his speech, Good Grief, David Adelstein.
My fellow Toastmasters, the other night I was at a networking event, and I despise networking events, hate them, because invariably I will be stuck in a conversation dealing with idle chit-chat. Dave, how's the weather? Oh boy, here we go. But during this idle chit-chat, I was asked, Dave, how many children do you have? And I paused. I should know how many children I have. But I had stage fright. I didn't know how to answer this question. And here is why. Some of you know, some of you don't know. 15 years ago, my wife and I were expecting our first child, a little girl. And very late into that pregnancy, we went to a specialty obstetrician that did some crazy procedure that resulted in a complication to the pregnancy. And I remember speaking to this obstetrician who based this procedure on a 50-year-old study that was done in the United Kingdom. And I said to him, are you out of your effing mind? I'm Jewish, born in America. My wife is Greek, born in the Mediterranean, and you're basing this procedure on a 50-year-old study based on an improper sample size? Naturally, the conversation escalated, and I was actually kicked out of the doctor's office. Go figure. But ultimately, the procedure resulted in a pretty drastic complication that resulted in my wife having to deliver a baby that we knew was not going to survive. So while that was occurring, I was needing to make funeral arrangements, burial arrangements for what would have been our firstborn. And interestingly, or maybe not so interestingly, when you go through this at a hospital and you actually deliver the baby, they do this very anticlimactic celebration, right? You deliver the baby, they want to take photos of the baby knowing that you're ultimately going to have to bury the baby. Very anticlimactic and very awkward. And I remember this experience and these emotions like it was yesterday. Because when you deal with a tragedy, and tragedy is not the right word, it was not a tragedy. When you deal with a certain experience that you feel is tragic, you remember those experiences, those feelings, the smell, the sounds like it was yesterday. And what I remember going through this experience is how different men and women grieve. I'm very good at compartmentalizing anything. Right? I can bury it in the recesses of my brain along with all the other sins that I probably have committed during the course of my life. My wife is not like that. So during this period of time, we were balancing different griefs, and that was not a very easy thing to do, including during the burial. Being Jewish, we don't have open burials and open caskets. My wife wanted something like that and had a little bit of resentment when I wouldn't participate in that undertaking. Nevertheless, fast forward 15 years until today. I have 3 kids. So when I was asked that question, the answer is 3 great kids that are all healthy. Now, rewind back 15 years earlier, I didn't know how my life would turn out. All I knew that I was experiencing this immense sadness, not realizing the trajectory of my life. And the reason why it hit me when I was asked that question is literally that same day, my parents have a friend that visits the cemetery frequently. It's a Jewish cemetery, and and her family is buried there. And she had sent me a photo of the little tombstone that she had cleaned out and then put rocks there to make it nice and pretty, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. I have not been to the cemetery maybe 10 years. It's been a while. I used to go early on, almost as for an emotional cleansing, but I haven't been in 10 years. Fast forward back to 15 years. 3 great kids, a 13-year-old that's doing well, extremely sarcastic like myself, so maybe not so good. An 11-year-old daughter that's a little melodramatic, maybe a little too melodramatic for me at times. And an 8-year-old boy that's a little bit of an a-hole, to be honest with you. He knows how to push my buttons like that, and push his siblings' buttons, and push his mommy's buttons. So I often feel guilty, though, when I talk about the grief, right? Because there are people that deal with legitimate grief and tragedies every day. You can turn on the news any day of the week, and you can see anybody dealing with horrific tragedies that there is no happy ending, and there never will be a happy ending, and they'll have to live with that grief for the rest of their life. And it tears me up knowing that there are people that have to experience that immense power of grief and sadness. I'm not one of those people. And my grief turned out to be lucky grief because of the fact that I can look back and say, but for that experience, I may not be in the situation I am today with 3 amazing kids that are all rocking and rolling, that are healthy. Who knows how my life would have turned out but for that experience. And one of my favorite movies is this movie, Sliding Doors, which is a Gwyneth Paltrow movie. And the reason I like it is because it characterizes what her life would be like had she not missed the subway train versus what her life is by getting on that train. And it's a completely different life. And sometimes I look at this experience and I think about that movie and I say, you know what? I'm glad I didn't get on that train, because had I gone on that train, I may be sitting here telling a completely different story. I may be telling you a legitimate, sad story instead of a sad story that turned into a lucky story. Madam Toastmaster.